Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for that brief but a broad review of the challenges we face and the leadership that you've shown at the helm of the State Department. Let me open with a question, if I could, about the workforce. I've had the opportunity to visit State Department employees around the world in lots of difficult and dangerous places, and like I believe all my colleagues, I'm uniformly impressed with their skills and their determination. If we're going to achieve our national security objectives, it's critical to ensure our diplomatic corps is putting the right people with the right tools and the right resources and training in the right places to carry out their work. We worked together, Senator Graham and I, to ensure that last year's bill delivered on that goal, but there is more to be done. What are the most critical workforce and other investments needed to strengthen the department to meet the challenges confronting us today and to have the flexibility to meet emerging challenges in the year ahead?
Yeah. Very much appreciate that question, Mr. Chairman. And really, it does come down to us, to people, to resources, and in some cases to some authorities. What you'll see in the budget is a proposed hiring increase for another 500 new employees to fill some of the staffing gaps that we have and that I can go into more detail on. We need more people to address some of these emerging priorities and emergencies. That includes, for example, a couple of hundred new consular positions. I know you're all seized with some of the challenges that Consular Affairs has experienced over the last few years because of COVID. We have been building back in a very significant way, but we need more work there and we need more resources there. So the budget proposes that. We need an additional number of civil and foreign service employees to scale up the Indo-Pacific strategy and to outcompete China, to strengthen our outreach, to fully staff, for example, new missions in the Pacific Islands, something else that we can talk about. We want to make sure that we are building on something that's been a terrific innovation that's been supported by this committee, and that is having additional positions so that we can increase our float, which enables us to pull people out of their day in, day out and allow them to have career-long training so that they can keep their skill set fresh, in fact, get new skills as they go along, for example, by coming here to spend time, by going to an academic institution, et cetera. We're requesting, in addition, new management hires. This is critical because where the rubber meets the road in the department, as in so many other institutions, is particularly our mid-level management. And we have terrific management people in the department, but what you know and what you'll see is that people who don't actually come up through the management silo in the department are nonetheless called upon at different stages in their career to exert management skills. We need more there. We have money there to make sure that we're protecting our missions and our diplomats, and I commend that to you. We have to keep pace with increased security threats and costs, the growing overseas presence, as I said, in the Pacific Islands. We hope to reopen the mission in Libya, something we want to work with you on. That's going to require some funding as well. We have significant funds as well to make sure that we are up to speed on cybersecurity. We have all been challenged across government by this, and we have to make sure that we have the funding to do that. There are a number of authorities as well, Mr. Chairman, that we can get into, and I'm also happy to share with you that would be very helpful. It would be very useful to us to have a new funding account for the Enduring Welcome operation to consolidate up to about $2.5 billion in existing funding for relocating our Afghan partners. There is some personal services contractor authority we need to hire more domestic personal services contractors. We can get to that. Some special immigrant visa adjustments, again, to make sure that we're making good on our commitments to our Afghan allies. And then I would just cite one last thing. There's more to be said, but you touched on this. I think it's very important for us to be able to pay our multilateral commitments. And this is not a gift to these institutions. It's not saying that these institutions are perfect or don't need a lot of work. It is saying that when we're not at the table, then usually someone else is, and probably not in a way that advances our interests and values. And particularly in institutions that are actually having a real impact on, in windowless rooms that people don't see, in shaping a lot of rules and a lot of norms and a lot of standards. For example, the way technology is being used, we need to be there. And part of being there sometimes is paying our dues. The other thing that happens in these institutions, we are the largest actually contributor to the UN system. And yet, when we're in arrears, our competitors and adversaries point to that and say, the United States isn't serious about it. So I hope we can do the best possible on that. I very much believe we should be back in UNESCO. Again, not as a gift to UNESCO, but because things that are happening at UNESCO actually matter, and we're not there, we're not shaping it. They are working on rules, norms, and standards for artificial intelligence. We want to be there. They are doing the same thing on education curricula around the world. China right now is the single largest contributor to UNESCO. That carries a lot of weight. We're not even at the table. It's important that we get back there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, both for that answer and for your leadership across those different issues. You mentioned at the conclusion of your introductory statement, Operation Enduring Welcome. I'd just be interested in a brief update on your efforts to review and identify any lessons learned on Afghanistan so far.
Thank you very much. Yes, one of the things that was very important to me was that we conduct an after-action review of the State Department's role and execution of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And we initiated that review. We brought in very experienced people, including one of our most senior retired diplomats to conduct it. They conducted many interviews, reviewed many documents, and have produced a, I think, important report that looks at what we did right, what we did wrong and could do better. And other agencies, as you know, have been doing the same thing. We've now been spending time putting all of this together to make sure that we look at some of the common lessons learned, especially where there's overlaps. And I am committed and determined to make that information available to Congress. And we will do that. We will do that by mid-April. So I can tell you today, you'll have the after-action review. We will share the findings and find the appropriate mechanism to do that within the next 3 weeks.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your opening, you referenced your commitment to including, consulting with Congress and including us in the foreign policy making process, and this is a good example of that work. I have long questions I look forward to asking about the Development Finance Corporation, the Global Fragility Act, but I'll just ask one and then turn to my ranking member. We're in the middle of a global food crisis. According to the World Food Program, pre-pandemic, there were 135 million people in more than 50 countries who were facing hunger. That has gone up to 345 million people across more than 80 countries today. It's fueled by conflict, climate change, COVID-19, and as the war in Ukraine grinds on, shocks in terms of prices of food and fertilizer are driving millions to the edge of starvation and increasing instability. What's the department doing to increase contributions from other donors to help tackle this challenge? And what should the international community be doing differently in order to improve the resiliency of communities facing food insecurity for the long term?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got to say, I very much appreciate the leadership of this committee, particularly you, Senator Graham, on this issue, and others. I'd say quickly two things. First of all, we have to tackle two aspects of this problem. We have emergency situations that demand an emergency response, where people need food now. And back in May, we gathered together countries from around the world at the UN Security Council to focus them, not just us, on the specific things that they can do and we can do to make sure, to the best of our ability, that food is getting to people when they need it. And of course, as you know very well, we've had an almost perfect storm that's built up between climate change, between COVID, and of course conflict, and now exacerbated dramatically by Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Ukraine, breadbasket to the world. That grain was taken off the market by the Russian aggression. I'm very glad that through the work of the United Nations and Turkey, we were able to get the Black Sea corridor going, but that's a fragile thing. It's made a difference, but it's fragile. So there's the emergency assistance. We've significantly increased our own contributions. As you know, we provided about $13.5 billion going back to the Russian aggression over the course of 2022. We've gotten other countries to step up and increase their contributions. World Food Program, Food and Agricultural Organization, the UN Fund. That's one critical piece of it. But again, as I know you know very well, the other piece that's critical, and what I hear, and I know you hear from our colleagues around the world, especially in Africa, is that as focused as they are on emergency assistance, what they really want is investment in their productive capacity. And this is absolutely critical to making sure that they have sustainable agricultural production and that they ultimately can feed their own people and actually feed others. There is tremendous potential in Africa. Let me just cite one thing that we're doing, and we have in the budget a significant fund for this. To me, one of the most exciting things, building on and adding to the Feed the Future program that AID and the State Department run, is something that we have, I think you know, one of the leading agronomists in the world at the State Department, Dr. Carrie Fowler. One of the things that we've learned in recent years is that the two most determinative things to having sustainable food production capacity comes down to two things: soil and seeds. If the soil quality is bad, you can throw as much fertilizer on it as you want, it's not going to work. We now have the ability to map the quality of soil pretty much anywhere, including throughout Africa, determine where it's good, where it's bad, what needs to be done to improve it. And we have a program there. The seeds, if they're not resilient to drought, to climate, to other things, again, doesn't matter. We have the capacity to do that, to provide resilient seeds for nutritious crops. So I think what you'll see in the budget is the beginnings of an important program to provide for that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. That's a topic of interest to both of us.